Jordan rode down the steep street as if his life depended on it, and in a way, it did. The bicycle wheel was crooked, each rotation generating an anguishing creak that made his teeth grind along with it. Sweat dripped down his neck, mixing with the dust and hot air of Dallas. He passed through a blinking red light and was almost hit by a car. The driver shouted something Jordan couldn't quite hear, but he knew it wasn't friendly. The backpack on his shoulders felt heavier than usual, and time seemed to move faster than his legs. He needed to make that delivery or lose another customer. With late rent and an almost empty fridge, there was no room for mistakes. In the midst of his thoughts, he saw him, an elderly man in a wheelchair struggling to climb a sloped sidewalk. The chair wobbled dangerously, and Jordan knew instantly that if he didn't act, the man would fall. He hesitated for a second, glancing between his bike and the watch on his wrist. He was already late, and stopping would make the delivery even harder. But the next moment, he dropped the bike to the ground and ran. "Sir, hold on. I'll help," Jordan shouted, grabbing the wheelchair before it tipped over. Planting his feet firmly, he lifted the front wheels and carefully guided the man to the flat part of the sidewalk. The man exhaled deeply, visibly relieved. "Thank you, young man. I thought I was going to tip over," he said, his voice hoarse but gentle. His face was etched with time, yet his eyes carried a warmth that made Jordan smile for the first time that day. "Are you okay now?" Jordan asked, still holding the wheelchair. "Yes, thanks to you." "What's your name, boy?" the elderly man asked, leaning slightly forward. "Jordan, sir. And yours?" "Miller. Henry Miller." Before they could talk further, Jordan heard a noise that made him turn. A thin man wearing a cap was fiddling with his bicycle, tugging at the delivery backpack. "Hey, let go of that!" Jordan shouted, running toward the thief. The man hesitated, but then pulled harder on the package. Jordan grabbed the man's arm, and a brief struggle ensued. The thief shoved Jordan against the wall, but Jordan wasn't one to give up easily. Dodging a punch, he snatched the package and used his body weight to push the thief backward. The man stumbled, fell, and quickly scrambled to his feet before running off. Panting and heart racing, Jordan inspected the package. It was intact. He looked at his bicycle. The crooked wheel seemed even worse now, but at least the delivery was still secure. "Are you all right?" Mr. Miller called from across the street, his voice full of genuine concern. Jordan raised a hand in reassurance. "Yeah, just a bit of trouble. I need to go now, but it was nice meeting you, Mr. Miller." The elderly man smiled, but something in his gaze lingered with Jordan. Adjusting the backpack, Jordan pedaled as fast as he could toward his destination. The customer wasn't pleased about the delay. Grumbling, he signed the receipt and tossed a miserable tip into Jordan's hand. Jordan stayed silent. He was used to this kind of treatment, though it didn't make the weight in his chest any lighter. By the time he left, the sun hung lower in the sky. On his way home, he passed the spot where he'd helped Mr. Miller. The elderly man was still there, waiting for a bus or a ride. He waved at Jordan, who gave a tired nod in response. That's when Jordan noticed something he hadn't seen before, a discreet emblem on the side of Mr. Miller's wheelchair. He didn't recognize it right away, but something about it intrigued him. As he rode away, the image of the emblem lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling there was more to the man than met the eye. Despite his exhaustion, a small spark of curiosity emerged. Jordan's life was full of problems that needed immediate solutions, but fate, it seemed, had set him on an unexpected path. The alarm blared, but Jordan didn't move. It was as if the sound was miles away, muffled by a thick layer of exhaustion. When he finally opened his eyes, sunlight streamed through the window of his small room, illuminating a pile of bills on the table beside his bed. Reaching for his phone, he saw the time, noon. He'd already missed at least 3 deliveries. Sighing, he got up and walked to the kitchen. There he found only an empty cereal box and half a bottle of warm water. His stomach growled, but there was no time for complaints. His battered bicycle leaned against the backyard wall, waiting for him. As he adjusted the stuck chain, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and froze. "Jordan, I'm out of patience. You have until tomorrow to pay what you owe. No excuses." The sender's name wasn't saved, but Jordan didn't need to look twice. It was the loan shark he'd borrowed from during the pandemic, a desperate attempt to keep up with mounting bills. Jordan dropped the phone and ran his hands through his hair, trying to calm the wave of panic rising in his chest. "Fix this, Jordan. At least this," he muttered to himself, as if repeating the words could make them true. After several minutes of struggling with the chain, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, he found Carla standing at the entrance to the yard. Her smile was like a cleaver, sharp and dangerous. "Good morning, Jordan, or should I say good afternoon. I heard you've been delaying deliveries," she said. He ignored the comment, focusing on the bicycle, but Carla wouldn't give up. "Yeah, it's not easy maintaining a reputation when your main tool barely works, right? Maybe you should try getting a real job, or maybe just give up." "Carla, I don't have time for this. Go mind your own business," Jordan replied without raising his eyes. She shrugged and left, but her muffled laughter echoed for a few seconds, fueling Jordan's anger. He knew Carla had been spreading rumors among clients, trying to further ruin what little remained of his credibility. But at the moment, he had bigger concerns. After what felt like an eternity, the bicycle finally started working again, at least enough for him to go out. He grabbed a light backpack and set off on foot to the next client, carrying smaller packages he could still deliver manually. The Dallas sun seemed hotter than ever, burning his neck as he walked through the busy streets. People rushed past, and each face seemed more distant, more indifferent. He was nobody there, just another delivery person struggling to survive. Upon arriving at an address, he delivered a package to a client who looked him up and down before signing the receipt. "You've been taking too long lately. Maybe I should look for someone else." Jordan just nodded, swallowing his humiliation. He returned to the street where a light wind was blowing, relieving the suffocating heat. He thought about Mr. Frank Miller and the strange emblem he had seen on the man's wheelchair. It still intrigued him. What did that symbol mean? Why did he feel so compelled to understand more about the elderly man? These thoughts were interrupted by the insistent ringing of his phone. Reluctantly, he picked up the device and saw another missed call from the loan shark. Fear returned, tightening his chest. It was as if the entire city were conspiring against him that day. The walk led him to a small park, where he sat for a few minutes, trying to recover his strength. As he took deep breaths, he noticed something strange. A dog he frequently saw barking nonstop was mysteriously quiet. Jordan frowned. The air around him felt heavier, as if something ominous was on the horizon. Back at the building where he lived, he passed a neighbor who slammed a door so hard that a picture fell in the hallway. Jordan just sighed, feeling that the noises of everyday life reflected the disorder within himself. In his room, he let himself fall onto the bed, exhausted, staring at the ceiling with unfocused eyes. His phone was flashing with notifications, but he didn't have the energy to check them. After a few minutes, he picked up the receipt from the last delivery of the previous day and noticed something he hadn't before. On the back of the paper, there was a handwritten address, Mr. Miller's. Jordan turned the receipt between his fingers, thinking about what to do. He needed to know more about the man. Maybe there was some answer there, something that could change the course of his life. With a deep sigh, he got up and looked at the paper once more, feeling a spark of determination amid the chaos. Jordan stared at the card with Mr. Miller's address on the back of the receipt, determined to discover if the elderly man could help him or if it was just coincidence. Jordan walked through the streets of Dallas with quick steps and a restless heart. Mr. Miller's address was scribbled on the receipt in his pocket, and he had no idea what to expect. Questions swirled in his mind. Why did that man seem so important? What was on that badge? And above all, how could Mr. Miller help him, if at all? While crossing a busy street, a car almost hit him. The driver shouted something, but Jordan didn't pay attention. He was too focused on reaching his destination. The sidewalks were crowded, and the heat made the air almost unbearable. Still, he pressed on, ignoring the sweat running down his face. When he finally reached a narrower, quieter street, he looked around, checking the address again. The place looked ordinary, with worn brick buildings and small windows. But before he could reach the door he was looking for, he felt a strange presence behind him. He looked over his shoulder and saw two men walking toward him. One carried a stick, and the other had a hard expression that made Jordan's stomach turn. "Hey, you're Jordan, aren't you?" one of them said, his voice laden with threat. Jordan stopped, his entire body tense. He didn't need to ask who they were. He knew they were there because of the loan shark. "Look, I'm trying to resolve this. I just need a little more time," Jordan said, taking a step back. "Time's up, kid," replied the man with the stick, stepping forward. "Now we do this the hard way." Jordan looked around, searching for an exit. They were on a dead-end street, but there was a narrow alley to his right. Without thinking, he ran. The men shouted and chased him, but Jordan was fast. He dodged between piles of trash and old cans, grabbing one of their lids to protect himself. When the first man approached, Jordan used the lid as a shield, blocking the strike from the stick. The impact reverberated through his arm, but he didn't stop. With a quick movement, he pushed the man back and kicked the can, creating a temporary barrier. The second man tried to grab him, but Jordan avoided him, fleeing through the alley until he reached an open street. He heard the pursuer's footsteps fade in the distance, but didn't stop running until he was sure he was safe. Breathless and with a cut on his arm, he arrived at the building where he lived. The heat of blood running down the wound mixed with sweat, but Jordan knew he had no time to worry about that. When he turned the corner, his heart almost stopped. A black limousine gleamed under the sun, parked right in front of the building. A man in a suit stood beside it with a rigid posture and a calculated look. He waved to Jordan. "You're Jordan, right?" asked the man, his voice firm but polite. Jordan nodded, still catching his breath. He looked at the limousine and then at the man, confused. "Who wants to know?" "I'm Mr. Henry Miller's lawyer. He asked me to deliver this to you." The man extended an elegant business card in a thin folder. Jordan took the item, still suspicious. He opened the folder and found a detailed contract. The title read, "Employment Proposal, Exclusive Delivery Services." His eyes widened at the salary and benefits listed. Is this serious?" Jordan asked, looking at the lawyer. "Completely. Mr. Miller is very grateful for the help you gave yesterday. He believes someone like you, with determination and courage, deserves an opportunity." Jordan felt his chest tighten. The money offered was enough to resolve his debts, fix his bicycle, and even put food on the table for a good while. But something didn't feel right. It was too much generosity from someone he barely knew. "What's the catch?" he asked, staring at the lawyer. "There are no catches," replied the man with a slight smile. "Just special working conditions. Mr. Miller expects total dedication, and the routes can be challenging. You have until tomorrow to accept or decline. Think carefully." The lawyer got into the limousine and left, leaving Jordan standing on the sidewalk with the contract in his hands. He went up to his apartment with slow steps, his mind in confusion. He sat on the bed and looked at the papers again. What did it all mean? Why was Miller so interested in helping him? And what did he want in return? While staring at the ceiling, one question echoed in his mind louder than all the others. With his arm still aching, Jordan closed his eyes, thinking, If I accept, what exactly am I buying along with this salary? The next morning, Jordan woke up with a throbbing head. The cut on his arm, made during the fight the day before, was poorly bandaged, and the pain reminded him that the world around him was as hard as the cold floor where he had slept. He looked at the folded contract on the table. The paper seemed to scream at him, reminding him that this was his only chance to get out of the hole. With a deep sigh, he put on a clean shirt, one of the few he had, and stuffed the contract in his backpack. His bicycle was unusable, so he took the bus to the listed address. The journey was long, giving him too much time to think. What if it was a trap? What if there was something hidden between the lines of that contract? But above all, what if he said no and went back to the void he called life? The company building was imposing, a glass tower that shone like a jewel in the city center. Jordan swallowed hard as he went through the revolving doors, the sound of air conditioning instantly replacing the stifling heat from outside. He had never been in a place like this, with marble floors and receptionists wearing suits that seemed to cost more than his entire wardrobe. "I have a meeting scheduled with Mr. Miller," Jordan told the receptionist, feeling small. The woman nodded without even raising her eyes from the computer. "7th floor, meeting room 3. The corridors were spotless but cold, as if even the walls observed every step he took. When he entered the meeting room, he found a long table surrounded by executives whispering among themselves. They fell silent as soon as Jordan entered, their gazes evaluating him with disdain. He felt like a fish out of water. "Are you Jordan?" asked a man with graying hair. The tone of voice was sharp, almost challenging. "Yes, sir," Jordan replied, trying to stay calm. "Good," the man continued, pulling out a folder. "Let's get to the point. Mr. Miller believes in giving chances to people like you, but we need to make sure you can handle the job." Jordan nodded, although he wasn't exactly sure what they expected from him. He tried to explain his experience as a bicycle delivery person, talking about how he knew every corner of the city, but nobody seemed interested. Suddenly, the door opened, and Mr. Miller himself entered the room. He looked different, dressed in an elegant suit and leaning on a dark wooden cane, but the warm smile was the same. "Ah, Jordan, good to see you could make it," said Miller as everyone in the room respectfully stood up. He gestured for Jordan to remain seated. Miller approached and placed a firm hand on Jordan's shoulder. "I know all this must seem intimidating, but I want you to know that I believe in you. The world needs more people like you, someone who acts out of compassion even when no one is watching." Miller's words sounded sincere, but something in the environment continued to bother Jordan. He looked at the papers in front of him, the contract still waiting for his signature. One of the executives passed him a folder containing a series of terms that seemed confusing. "Read this carefully," said Miller with a smile. "But in summary, it's a job offer. I want you to be part of something new, something that can change the way deliveries are made in this city." "And what exactly do I have to do?" asked Jordan, still hesitant. "For now, deliveries, but soon, who knows? Maybe you'll manage teams. It all depends on how things unfold." Jordan signed the contract with trembling hands, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. As he handed over the signed papers, he noticed Carla on the other side of the glass, watching everything. Her look was one of pure hatred, and it made Jordan's stomach turn. Upon leaving the room, he was taken to a simple office in the back of the building, where he received a temporary badge and basic instructions. He was still processing everything when, in the hallway, he heard his name being mentioned by other employees. They spoke quietly, but Jordan caught pieces of phrases like "won't last" and "a risky move." He tried to ignore it, but the discomfort grew with each step. When he finally left the building, the badge hanging around his neck, a shiver ran down his spine. The city seemed the same, but something had changed. He looked at the sky. squeezed the badge in his hands, and muttered to himself. On the street, holding the badge, Jordan felt a shiver. Miller's offer seemed like a path of no return. Jordan arrived early at the company the next day, wearing the uniform they had given him. A simple blue shirt with the company logo embroidered on the chest. He held his badge with tense fingers, still trying to get used to the idea of working there. The environment was different from anything he had experienced before. Wide corridors, machines humming in the background, and curious looks from other employees passing by. "Ready to start?" asked a serious-looking supervisor holding a clipboard. Without waiting for Jordan's response, she handed him a map with routes and the keys to a delivery motorcycle. The first stop was in a poor neighborhood on the east side of the city. Jordan knew the area well. He had made deliveries there before. But this time, he was carrying cargo provided by the company. Boxes without clear senders, just labels with codes that made no sense to him. Upon arriving at the location, he parked the motorcycle and looked around. Groups of men were gathered on corners, watching him in silence, like predators analyzing prey. "You work for the big guys, right?" asked a young man who appeared out of nowhere, arms crossed and a defiant tone in his voice. Jordan hesitated. "I'm just delivering packages, man. Nothing special." The young man narrowed his eyes and gave a dry laugh before walking away. But the tension in the air didn't decrease. Jordan hurried to deliver the box and left before anyone else decided to interrogate him. The sound of the motorcycle engine seemed to echo louder than normal as he drove away. Upon returning to the company, he found Carla in the yard, leaning against one of the transport vans. She had a smile on her lips that made Jordan feel uncomfortable. "So, how was the first round?" she asked casually, but with a sharp tone. "It was smooth," Jordan responded, trying to hide his unease. "Smooth, huh? Don't worry, Jordan. You'll get used to it, or not." She gave a little laugh before walking away, leaving Jordan with more questions than answers. He didn't have much time to reflect as the supervisor called him again, this time to review the afternoon itinerary. While walking through the corridors, Jordan heard whispers coming from a room nearby. He stopped for a moment and tried to listen better. "We can't let anything slip. These deliveries need to be discreet," said a male voice. "And the new guy? He doesn't know anything?" asked another person. Jordan moved away before being noticed, but the conversation left him uncomfortable. Something was happening, and he felt that somehow he was in the middle of it all. Still, he didn't know how to ask without raising suspicions. At the end of the day, while storing the motorcycle in the garage, Jordan noticed something unusual. A shipment of automotive parts was being unloaded in the back area, but there was no visible documentation or record. He approached discreetly and saw Carla talking to a man who appeared to be responsible for the delivery. They were laughing and speaking quietly, but the words weren't audible from that distance. Jordan tried to ignore what he saw and return to the main yard, but the discomfort grew in his mind. He knew something wasn't right, but what could he do? He needed the job and the money. However, with each new suspicious detail, he felt he was entering dangerous territory. Before leaving, he took one last look at the back of the building. The sun was setting, and the orange light illuminated the boxes labeled with codes he didn't understand. He leaned against a wall, feeling the weight of the entire day on his back. The motorcycle still hummed in his head, but what really echoed was the growing doubt that something bigger and more dangerous was happening at the company. Jordan leaned against the wall and realized he could no longer pretend not to see. Something illegal was happening, and now he was part of it. The company parking lot was quiet, but Jordan felt the weight of invisible eyes upon him. Leaning on his motorcycle, he pretended to fiddle with his backpack while discreetly observing the movements around him. The suspicious boxes he had seen the day before remained stacked at the back of the yard, surrounded by a palpable tension. Carla passed by in the distance, exchanging quick words with a supervisor. Even from where he stood, Jordan could catch her satisfied expression, something between confidence and superiority. The phone in his pocket vibrated, startling him. He grabbed the device with trembling fingers and saw the name that made him shiver, the Loan Shark. He hesitated for a moment, but knew that ignoring the messages would only make things worse. "You're playing with time you don't have, Jordan. Either pay up or you'll regret it." The words, dry and threatening, seemed to echo inside his head. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the panic that was beginning to overtake him. He knew he needed to act fast, but the money was still far from his reach. While pondering his options, a folded note fell from his makeshift desk. He opened it immediately, recognizing Carla's handwriting. "Silence is worth gold. I hope you know that." Jordan's blood boiled. It was obvious she knew something, perhaps even more than he did, about what was really happening in the company. But the note seemed more like a warning than a direct threat, and that left him even more confused. Not knowing exactly what to do, Jordan left the garage and began walking through the city. He needed a break to clear his thoughts, but all he found was a greater weight at every corner. The streets, which used to be his comfort zone, now seemed laden with hidden dangers. He entered a small convenience store to buy a bottle of water. The air conditioning blew temporary relief, but his mind was still trapped in the whirlwind of problems. He observed his reflection in the refrigerator glass. His face looked more tired than he remembered. The pain in his barely healed arm was a constant reminder that things were moving too fast and in the wrong direction. When he returned to the company, he found an even heavier atmosphere. Mr. Miller called him for a conversation in his office, a luxurious space that strongly contrasted with the rest of the building. Miller was sitting behind an impeccably organized desk, his fingers drumming on the dark wooden surface. "Jordan, I'm impressed with your dedication," Miller began with the same affable smile as before. "But I've noticed you seem hesitant. Is something bothering you?" Jordan swallowed hard. "No, sir. Just adapting to the rhythm." Miller leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Jordan's. "I know starting something new can be difficult, and I want you to know that I'm here to help. If you're having financial difficulties, I can arrange in advance so you can put things in order." Jordan felt his stomach turn. The words were kind, but carried an implicit weight. "I appreciate it, Mr. Miller, but I think I'm managing to get by." "Great," said Miller, leaning back. "But remember, the door is always open." When he left the office, Jordan felt as if the air around him was getting thicker. He needed to find out what was really going on, but he couldn't be obvious. That night, he took a small voice recorder he had bought years ago and put it in his uniform pocket. If there was something to be discovered, he needed proof. While making his last round of the day, he passed again through the corridor where he had seen the suspicious boxes. The area was empty, but he heard voices in the distance. He hid behind a pile of materials and turned on the recorder. "So it's confirmed. The next delivery will be bigger. We need to make sure nobody notices anything," said a male voice. "And the rookie? He seems a bit lost," replied a woman. Jordan recognized the tone. It was Carla. "Don't worry about him. Miller has everything under control." Jordan's heart raced. He kept his breathing controlled, waiting for them to leave. When silence finally returned, he escaped through the corridor and ran home. That night, while listening to the recordings, each word seemed to push him toward a decision he wasn't ready to make. He knew that what was recorded was dangerous, but it was also his only chance to escape that situation. He focused and thought, if I can record something incriminating, maybe I can end this once and for all. Jordan arrived early to work the next day, the small recorder hidden in his uniform pocket. His eyes scanned the environment with each step, looking for any sign that someone might be suspicious of him. The yard was busy with employees coming and going at a fast pace, but Jordan knew the frantic atmosphere wasn't by chance. There was something bigger at play, and he was in the middle of it. The recorder had already captured compromising snippets of conversation the night before, but Jordan knew he needed more. Vague words and insinuations wouldn't be enough to expose the scheme. He needed clear evidence, something that couldn't be ignored. And above all, he needed to be careful. He spent the early morning organizing deliveries and doing his best to appear busy. But as soon as he had the chance, he went to the loading area where the suspicious boxes were stored. He hid behind a pile of equipment and turned on the recorder. Shortly after, voices began to echo through the warehouse. "This shipment needs to go out tonight," said a firm voice. "We can't delay." "Relax. Nobody will notice. Everything's already arranged," replied another in a more casual tone. Jordan leaned a bit to see better and saw Carla talking with one of the supervisors. They were close to the boxes that he immediately recognized, the same ones that had no senders or clear labels. He held his breath, trying to catch every word. "What are we going to do about the new guy?" asked the supervisor, crossing his arms. "He's been too curious." Carla laughed, but there was something dark in her expression. "Jordan isn't a problem. He doesn't have the courage to do anything. And if he does, we'll take care of him." Jordan's blood ran cold. He clenched his fists, feeling a mix of anger and fear, but he didn't move. He waited until Carla and the supervisor left before sliding out of his hiding spot. The tension was high, and the air in the warehouse seemed heavier than ever. He knew he couldn't stay in that place for long without raising suspicion. He left through the side door and blended in with the other employees in the yard, trying to appear as natural as possible. Throughout the day, Jordan remained vigilant, observing every detail. At one point, he saw Carla arguing with a man he didn't recognize. They were in the outer yard near a van loaded with boxes similar to those in the warehouse. The tone of their conversation was low, but their posture revealed latent tension. Jordan took the opportunity to get close enough to hear. "If Jordan discovers anything, you'll regret it," said the man, his voice sharp. Carla rolled her eyes. "I already told you, he won't discover anything. Leave him to me." Jordan felt his heart race. He was at the center of a plot much bigger than he had imagined. Every word he overheard confirmed that he was dealing with something dangerous, but it also motivated him to continue. He needed to finish what he had started. Later, while making a delivery, he took advantage of his time alone to review what he had recorded. The voices were clear enough, but something definitive was still missing, something that could expose the full extent of the scheme. He knew that if he wanted more, he would have to take bigger risks. That night, Jordan returned to the warehouse. The place was emptier than during the day, but there was still some movement. He hid behind a stack of boxes, adjusting the recorder. The hours dragged on, and he almost gave up waiting when the warehouse door burst open. It was Carla, accompanied by a group of men. They were pushing carts full of boxes, murmuring among themselves. Jordan held his breath as he watched them. They were organizing the boxes and discussing delivery routes. Then he heard something that made him freeze. "This is the last shipment before the big operation. Miller wants everything perfect," said Carla. Miller. Jordan almost let out an audible sigh. He knew Miller was involved, but hearing the man's name directly associated with the scheme was something else. His heart was beating hard, but he maintained focus, adjusting the recorder to capture every word. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the warehouse, and Jordan realized someone was approaching his hiding spot. He crouched even lower in the corner, trying not to be seen, but it was too late. One of the security guards found him. "What are you doing here?" asked the man, grabbing Jordan by the collar. Before Jordan could answer, Carla appeared, her eyes narrowed. Ah, Jordan, I thought you were smart. She gestured, and the security guard released him. But the look on her face said the situation was far from resolved. You've been snooping where you shouldn't, haven't you? Jordan knew he was in trouble, but he couldn't show weakness. I was just trying to understand what's happening here. Carla laughed, but the sound was cold and humorless. You should worry about your job, not things that don't concern you. Before he could respond, another voice echoed through the warehouse. It was Mr. Miller. He entered, leaning on his cane, but his presence seemed to fill the space. Silence fell immediately. What's going on here? He asked, his eyes shifting between Carla and Jordan. Carla started to explain, but Miller interrupted her with a gesture. He looked at Jordan, and for a moment his gaze seemed almost paternal, but there was something dark behind that familiar smile. Jordan, said Miller, his voice low but firm, curiosity can be dangerous. I'm offering you an opportunity to change your life. I hope you don't waste it. Jordan didn't respond. He knew any word could make the situation worse. Miller signaled to the others, and they began to disperse, but not before Carla cast one last threatening look at Jordan. When everyone left, Jordan stepped out of the warehouse and took a deep breath. He knew he didn't have much time left. The recordings he had were enough to prove that something was very wrong. Upon reaching the street, Jordan was certain it was time to take action, even if it came at a high cost. He ran through the streets to his building, his heart pounding in his chest. The night was cold, but he was sweating as if the air around him was an additional weight. Every corner seemed to hide a threat. Every shadow carried the possibility of someone following him. When he finally reached the building, he stopped at the entrance, breathing deeply and trying to compose himself. He couldn't go in looking so nervous. In the hall, he found Mr. Rodriguez, his downstairs neighbor, sitting in an aged wooden chair. Rodriguez looked up at him, frowning. You look like you've seen a ghost, kid, he said, his voice deep but concerned. Jordan hesitated for a moment, but then something inside him collapsed. He couldn't keep it to himself anymore. Mr. Rodriguez, can I talk to you? It's serious. Rodriguez gestured for him to sit beside him. I'm listening. Speak. Jordan told him everything, from the moment he helped Mr. Miller to the scheme that seemed to be run by the company. His voice trembled as he recounted Carla's threats and Miller's direct involvement. When he finished, Rodriguez was looking at him with a mixture of astonishment and concern. Kid, you're in a nest of snakes, Rodriguez said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. But if what you're saying is true, you need to act carefully. You can't trust the police without evidence. Jordan took the recorder from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. I have this, recordings. I don't know if it's enough, but it's what I have. Rodriguez looked at the small device as if it were a bomb about to explode. Maybe it is, but you need to do more than that. You need to make sure they can't silence you before everything comes to light. Rodriguez stood up, disappearing into his apartment for a moment. When he returned, he brought an old cell phone with a cracked screen. Take this. Use it to send the evidence. It can't be traced. Jordan took the phone with trembling hands, thanking him quietly. He knew he needed to act quickly, but fear kept him frozen in place. You're not alone in this, Rodriguez said, placing a firm hand on Jordan's shoulder. But you need to be smart. Don't let them catch you. Back in his apartment, Jordan began listening to the recordings again, his hands shaking as he fast-forwarded and rewound through the captured conversations. The details were incriminating. Mentions of illegal routes, undocumented boxes, and Miller being directly associated with everything. It was dangerous, but it was exactly what he needed. Before sending the evidence, he wrote a brief statement on his phone explaining his position as an employee and the details he had witnessed. Each word felt like a risk, but he knew he had to do it. When he finished, He sent everything anonymously to a police contact he had found in a quick search. Then, he deleted the files from the phone and turned it off. For a moment, the silence in the apartment was deafening. Jordan felt the weight of the decision fall upon him. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, he heard footsteps outside the door. His heart raced. He looked to the corner of the apartment and grabbed an old baseball bat he kept as a memento from his school days. Holding the object tightly, he approached the door. The footsteps stopped. A light knock echoed on the wood. Jordan remained silent, trying to control his breathing. After a few seconds, the footsteps began again, moving away. He released the air trapped in his chest, but didn't let go of the bat. The feeling of being watched was unbearable. At the window, he observed the street. The neighborhood seemed calm, but his mind was on high alert. He saw a figure in the distance with their back to the building, but couldn't make out who it was. He knew he needed to be more careful than ever. Later that night, a police car slowly passed by the street. Its lights were flashing silently, and Jordan felt a mixture of relief and fear. They had received the material. The investigations would begin, but he didn't know if that would be enough to protect him. What would happen now? Who else would be involved? Rodriguez knocked softly on the door and entered without waiting for permission. "Did you do what you had to do, kid?" Jordan nodded wordlessly. Rodriguez looked at him, a serious expression on his face. "Now all that's left is to wait, but prepare yourself because things might get worse before they get better." The silence of the night enveloped the apartment. Jordan sat on the edge of the bed, holding the bat as if it were a talisman. He knew the clock was ticking, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. But at the same time, he felt there was no turning back. When the old cell phone vibrated with a new message, he almost dropped it on the floor. Trembling, he opened the message. It was short, but enough to bring a spark of hope. Material received. Investigations ongoing. The next morning, Jordan woke up to the distant sound of sirens. He ran to the window, his heart racing. On the horizon, blue and red lights flashed as patrol cars crossed the streets toward downtown. He knew it had something to do with what he had sent. There was no turning back now. Trying to stay calm, Jordan opened his apartment door and saw Rodriguez in the hallway holding a cup of coffee. "Heard the sirens?" asked Rodriguez, handing the cup to Jordan. "They're moving fast," Jordan replied with a nod, but the tension didn't ease. He knew the loan shark's thugs, or Carla, could show up at any moment. He went back inside and started packing a bag with essentials. If things went wrong, he needed to be prepared to run. However, before he could leave, he heard hurried footsteps on the stairs. He ran to the window and saw two men entering the building lobby, the loan shark's thugs. Panic took over him. "Rodriguez!" he whispered down the hallway, waving desperately. "They're here!" Rodriguez appeared beside him, peering through the window. "Go through the back. I'll hold them off." "But what about you?" "No buts. Go, now!" Jordan squeezed his neighbor's hand in gratitude and ran to the building's back exit. He passed through narrow corridors, climbed down a low wall, and dropped into an alley behind the building. Adrenaline was all that moved him now. As he turned the corner, he heard shouts and the sound of something heavy being knocked over. He knew Rodriguez was delaying the thugs, but time was limited. He needed to find a safe place and, at the same time, make sure the authorities were taking action. While running through the streets, he spotted Carla hurriedly leaving the company with two large suitcases. She looked around suspiciously before getting into a parked car. Jordan quickened his pace, hiding behind a container while watching. Shortly after, patrol cars surrounded the block. Police officers with megaphones ordered everyone to stay where they were. Jordan saw Carla stop the car and try to exit through the passenger door, but the police were quick. She was immobilized, and her cry of protest echoed through the street. Across the block, Jordan spotted Mr. Miller trying to leave the main building. He was being escorted by two security guards and walking quickly toward a black limousine parked at the gate. But before they could get in, patrol cars blocked them. Police surrounded the car, and Miller slowly raised his hands, his expression serious. Jordan stood still, hidden, watching everything. He saw Miller's eyes meet his for a brief moment. There was something in that look, a mixture of recognition and resignation. Jordan didn't know how to interpret it. Before he could leave his hiding place, he felt a strong hand grab his arm. He turned and saw one of the loan shark's thugs. "Found you," the man growled, pulling Jordan forcefully. "Let me go," shouted Jordan, trying to break free. The thug pulled out a gun, but Jordan reacted instinctively, pushing him against a pile of boxes and knocking everything down. He took advantage of the moment to escape, running toward the police-surrounded area. The police were advancing, disarming the criminals one by one. Jordan managed to blend into the crowd, watching from afar as Miller was placed in a patrol car in handcuffs. Carla was shouting something in protest, but no one seemed to listen. Suddenly, one of the police officers approached Jordan. "Are you Jordan?" The young man froze but nodded. "Yes, I am." "You're the one who sent the evidence, right?" The officer's tone was gentler than he expected. "Yes, I was," Jordan replied, his voice low, almost inaudible. "We have some questions for you." "Don't worry, you're safe now." As he was being taken to give his statement, Jordan saw Rodriguez in the distance, waving at him with a discreet smile. For the first time in weeks, Jordan felt a wave of relief. But at the same time, he knew this was just the beginning. As he was being taken for questioning, Jordan heard the police officer say, "There's something else you need to know about Mr. Miller." Jordan sat in the small, dimly lit police station room, the environment illuminated by a strong lamp swaying slightly from the ceiling. The detective in front of him flipped through a folder full of documents and photos, each movement accompanied by the soft sound of sliding paper. Jordan kept his hands crossed in his lap, trying to control the anxiety that still caused him to break into a cold sweat. "You did the right thing, kid," said the detective, finally looking at him. "But there's something you need to know about Henry Miller." Jordan frowned, his heart racing once again. He had already imagined many things about Miller, the smuggling, the power he wielded behind the scenes, but the detective's expression suggested something deeper. "Henry Miller isn't just a corrupt businessman," continued the detective, placing a document on the table. "Years ago, he had a partner, a man named Thomas Mitchell." Jordan remained silent, waiting for the connection he still couldn't see. The detective pushed a photo toward him. It was black and white, worn, showing two young men. One of them was clearly Miller. The other had a face that seemed vaguely familiar. "This man," said the detective, pointing to Thomas Mitchell, "was your great-uncle. He disappeared in the 1980s, and Miller was the last person to see him." Jordan felt the world spin for a moment. He blinked, trying to process the words. "What? How is this possible?" "We made the connection through old documents," explained the detective. "It seems Mr. Miller tried to erase his relationship with Mitchell, but there's evidence their business didn't end well. And now, with you involved, he probably recognized your surname from the beginning." Jordan rested his hands on the table, his thoughts spinning in his mind like a whirlwind. What did this mean? Miller had known who he was all along. And if he knew, why did he offer him an opportunity? Why didn't he push him away? Before Jordan could formulate another question, the detective continued. "The investigation against Miller is solid, thanks to you. But this connection to your family might complicate things. Some assets that belong to your great-uncle might now be recovered, since he never had any other direct heirs." Jordan could hardly believe what he was hearing. The idea that something from his family's past was about to resurface left him both curious and uneasy. He had barely known his lineage beyond his parents, and now it seemed an even bigger mystery was unfolding before him. In the following days, the story took unexpected turns. The loan shark who had threatened him was formally charged and arrested, thanks to evidence that emerged during Miller's investigation. Carla, in turn, also faced an imminent trial. The smuggling scheme was exposed, and Jordan's role as a whistleblower was publicly recognized. But the most unexpected development was what happened to Miller's company. With operations shut down and police seizing assets, part of the funds were reverted to a compensation fund for victims. Among these victims was Jordan. He received a significant amount as compensation, enough to pay off his debts and start a new life. Jordan used the money wisely. He paid the overdue rent, bought a new bicycle, and renovated a small commercial space. Within a few weeks, he opened his own sustainable delivery company, simply naming it Jordan Deliveries. The modest sign hanging on the facade reflected the new direction of his life: honesty, hard work, and hope. The first days were challenging, but gradually, customers began to trust his service. Neighbors who had previously looked at him with suspicion now greeted him with smiles. Rodriguez was one of the first to place an order, requesting a package delivery to a relative in another city. He also helped paint the office walls, always offering his dry humor and direct advice. On a sunny afternoon, while Jordan organized papers at the counter, he found one last letter from the local foundation that had helped mediate the financial compensation. The letter thanked him for his courage and highlighted how his act of whistleblowing had inspired others to speak out against injustices. Jordan stepped outside the office and sat on the sidewalk, watching the street. Children played with bicycles, and the lively sounds of conversation filled the air. He took a deep breath, feeling the sun's warmth on his face. For the first time in a long time, he felt in control of his life. His mind wandered back to the day he helped Henry Miller, the elderly man in the wheelchair about to fall. In that moment, he hadn't been thinking about rewards or consequences. He had simply acted out of compassion. Now, sitting at the door of his new business, he realized how much that one act had changed everything. From a simple gesture of kindness, a new life had been born. The path had been winding, but it had led Jordan to a better place than he could have ever imagined.